She heard the laughter before she fully understood the words. Just a poor widow. The sentence was spoken lightly, almost casually, the kind of comment people make when they believe no one important is listening. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed anyway, sharp and precise, wrapped in polite smiles and carefully neutral expressions. She stood still for a moment longer than expected, both hands gripping the strap of her handbag. The leather felt real, solid, more real than the room around her. No one was looking directly at her. The council chamber was wide and immaculate, bathed in cold, natural light, filtered through tall glass windows. Everything about the space communicated quiet authority: polished wood, muted colors, framed certificates lining the walls. This was a room where decisions were made calmly, efficiently, without emotion. And in this room, she had already been decided. The chairman cleared his throat and spoke with a rehearsed tone of concern. He offered condolences for her loss, mentioned the community's respect for her late husband, spoke of procedure, of protocol, of what was best moving forward, best for everyone else. A folder was placed gently in front of her, slid across the table with practiced ease. Inside were neatly organized documents, transfers, approvals, resolutions already drafted. Everything was ready. Everything assumed her compliance. "This is just a formality," the chairman said kindly. "Signing today will allow us to move forward without complications." Complications. The word felt small for what was being taken from her. To her left, two council members exchanged a brief glance, satisfied, relaxed. To her right, a younger woman, likely a legal advisor, tapped her pen lightly against the table, impatience barely concealed. Time mattered to them. Speed mattered. She was expected to be overwhelmed, confused, grateful someone else was handling things. She said nothing. Her silence was interpreted exactly how they wanted it to be. She opened the folder and turned the pages slowly, not because she didn't understand them, but because slowing down disrupted the rhythm they had carefully orchestrated. The chairman maintained his pleasant expression, but his fingers began to drum softly against the tabletop. There were numbers, assets, properties, funds she recognized from conversations long ago, conversations that had always ended with her husband saying, "It's handled. Don't worry." She had trusted him, now that trust was being weaponized. "If anything seems unclear," the chairman added gently, leaning forward, "I can explain it in simpler terms." The condescension was subtle, polished, almost generous. She lifted her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were calm, steady, too steady for a woman they assumed was emotionally fragile. The shift was small, but it rippled through the room. One council member looked away. The legal advisor paused her tapping. Still, no one challenged her. "This council has reviewed everything carefully," the chairman continued. "This decision protects the community. It's the responsible choice." Responsible, when spoken by men who would not bear the consequences. She closed the folder gently and placed her hands on top of it. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. A council member finally spoke, unable to tolerate it any longer. "There's no need to complicate things," he said, his tone edged with irritation disguised as concern. "You don't need this burden right now." Burden, as if her voice were the problem. She nodded slowly. That single motion released the tension in the room. Shoulders relaxed. The chairman smiled with renewed confidence. The advisor crossed her legs again. They thought they had her. She asked for a glass of water. The request delayed everything, just enough. The chairman stood to fetch it, still smiling. As he moved away, the atmosphere shifted. The professionalism thinned. "She won't cause trouble," someone murmured. "She wouldn't even know where to start," another replied quietly. She heard every word. When the water arrived, she thanked him politely, took a small sip, and set the glass down with deliberate care, as if this were a social visit, not an attempt to erase her authority. "May I take these documents with me to review?" she asked calmly. The question wasn't expected. The chairman hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough to betray the truth. This was not part of the plan, but he recovered quickly. "Of course," he said, "though there's really no need. Everything has already been verified." Verified by whom, she wondered, but didn't ask. She slipped the folder into her bag and stood. Her movements were slow, composed. No panic, no urgency. That unsettled them more than protest ever could. "We'll speak tomorrow," the chairman said, already extending his hand. She shook it firmly. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the smile faded. There was no gratitude in her expression, no submission, only awareness. As she walked out, she felt the weight of their confidence behind her, the certainty that this was finished, that she would sign and disappear quietly. The hallway outside was silent. Her footsteps echoed sharply against the floor, each one a reminder that she was still present, still unremoved. Outside, the air felt heavier, or perhaps she was only beginning to understand the real weight of what had just happened. She sat in her car without starting the engine and opened the folder again. Away from their voices, the inconsistencies stood out clearly. Dates that didn't align, language too vague for transfers this large, signatures that felt rushed. And then she realized the most important detail. They were in a hurry. Haste always meant something was wrong. She closed the folder firmly. This wasn't procedure. It was a trap, and they believed she was incapable of seeing it. What they didn't know, the detail they dismissed so easily, was that she had spent her entire life watching men like them make decisions under the assumption that no one was paying attention. She started the car and drove away calmly, their laughter still echoing in her mind. Just a poor widow. They had made a mistake, and they were about to learn exactly how expensive that mistake would be. They didn't even lower their voices when they talked about her. That was what hurt most. Not the words themselves, she had heard worse before, but the certainty with which they said them, as if her presence no longer mattered enough to require discretion, as if she were already erased. The meeting room smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. A long oval table dominated the space, its surface so reflective that it mirrored the ceiling lights like a row of cold, indifferent eyes. The men seated around it leaned back comfortably in their chairs, suits tailored, watches heavy, confidence effortless. She sat at the far end. No one had offered to help her pull out her chair. No one had asked if she needed water. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Let's be practical," one of them said, tapping a pen against a leather folder. "This doesn't need to be complicated." Another smiled, the kind of smile reserved for children who don't understand adult conversations. "We've already explained everything. The accounts, the assets, the transfers." A third voice cut in, sharper. "There's nothing for you to manage, nothing to worry about." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing the information. In truth, she was listening to something else entirely, the rhythm of their certainty, the way they spoke in absolutes, the way they assumed the matter was already settled. That kind of confidence only came from believing the game was over. They slid the folder across the table toward her. The leather made a soft sound against the polished wood, almost polite. Inside were documents neatly organized, tabs color-coded, signatures already prepared. It was impressive, really. Someone had spent time on this. "Just standard consolidation," the man with the pen said. "Temporary, until things stabilize." Another added casually, "You don't want to deal with numbers anyway. This stuff is confusing." There it was. The sentence they always used when they wanted control without resistance. Confusing. She lifted the folder but didn't open it. Instead, she looked around the room. There were 7 of them. All men. All familiar faces from years of polite dinners and forced condolences. They avoided her eyes now, not out of guilt, but out of dismissal. To them she was a formality, a widow-shaped obstacle. "Is the bank aware of this?" she asked quietly. The question landed softer than they expected, so soft, in fact, that a few of them exchanged amused glances. "The bank?" One chuckled. "Why would they need to be?" Another leaned forward. "This is internal. Family. Family." The word was always useful when accountability became inconvenient. She tilted her head slightly. "So the accounts have already been restructured?" "Yes," the man with the folder said. "Pre-approved. Everything's ready." She paused. Then she asked, "By whom?" That caused a brief hesitation. Not panic, not fear, just the slightest delay. A fraction of a second where no one spoke. "By us," someone answered finally. "By the board." She nodded again, still calm, still composed. "Which bank officer authorized the consolidation?" she asked. This time the pause was longer. They hadn't expected questions. They had expected signatures. A man near the window cleared his throat. "That level of detail isn't important." "But it exists," she said, not accusing, Not emotional, just factual. Of course it does, another replied quickly. Everything is above board. Above board. Another favorite phrase. She finally opened the folder. The documents were exactly what she expected. Clean, professional, persuasive. Language designed to overwhelm rather than inform. Paragraphs dense with financial jargon. Clauses buried beneath clauses. To someone skimming, it would feel authoritative. To someone intimidated, final. She read slowly, line by line. They grew restless. One of them checked his watch. Another sighed. Someone muttered, "We went over this already." She reached a page near the middle and stopped. Her finger rested on a paragraph no one else was watching. Then she closed the folder. "I'd like copies," she said. The reaction was immediate. "Why?" one asked. "For my records." "There's no need." "I insist." The room shifted. Control, once absolute, now felt slightly less secure. "We can have them sent later," the man with the pen said. "After everything is signed." She met his eyes for the first time. "No," she said calmly. "Now." The word was soft, but it carried weight. Not authority. Not yet. But certainty. A silence followed. Not awkward. Not dramatic. Calculating. Finally, one of them gestured to an assistant standing near the door. "Make copies." The assistant hesitated, just long enough to notice the tension, then took the folder and left. As the door closed behind her, the men leaned back again, attempting to recover the atmosphere of inevitability. "You have to understand," one said, adopting a tone of false patience. "This is for your protection." Another added, "Managing assets at your age can be stressful." "At your age." She smiled faintly. "Stress isn't new to me," she replied. They laughed politely, not because it was funny, but because laughter helped restore their sense of dominance. "Once this is finalized," the man with the pen continued, "you won't have to worry about banks, statements, audits. We'll handle all of that." She didn't answer. She was thinking about the signature block, specifically the spacing. It was subtle, almost invisible, but she had noticed it the moment she saw it. The signature line wasn't where it should have been. It had been shifted slightly, enough to accommodate an additional authorization, someone else's. She had seen that formatting before, years ago, in a completely different context. The assistant returned and placed the copies gently in front of her. She thanked her with a nod. Then she stood. The movement caught them off guard. She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, as if she had all the time in the world. "I'll review these," she said, "and I'll be in touch." One of them frowned. "There's no need to delay." "I don't rush financial decisions," she replied. "I never have." They exchanged glances again, this time less amused. "You understand," the man near the window said carefully, "that without signing, access to certain funds may be restricted." There it was. The threat, dressed as concern. She met his gaze without flinching. "Then I suppose," she said, "we'll all have to be patient." She turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped her, not because they respected her, but because they still believed they had already won. In the hallway outside, her footsteps echoed softly against marble floors. The building was quiet, prestigious, insulated from urgency. She paused near a large window overlooking the city and exhaled slowly. The city looked the same as it always had. Busy. Unaware, she unfolded one of the copied pages and looked again at the authorization section. Yes, there it was. A reference number. Small, easy to miss, but unmistakable. She took out her phone. She didn't call family. She didn't call a lawyer. She scrolled past contacts she hadn't used in years. Then she stopped. The name was still there, unchanged. She pressed call. After 2 rings, a voice answered. Calm, professional. International Asset Services. "This is Daniel." "It's me," she said. There was a pause. Then the tone changed. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." She looked back through the glass wall at the meeting room behind her. The men still talking, still confident, still unaware. "I have a reference number," she said, "and I need to know who approved it." The silence on the other end was immediate. Then, slowly, "Can you read it to me?" She did. The pause this time was different, longer. He didn't hide it. "That shouldn't exist," he said finally. Her grip tightened on the phone. "So it wasn't authorized?" she asked. "No," he replied. "It wasn't." She closed her eyes. Not in relief, in confirmation. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I need you to prepare something." "For whom?" he asked. "For everyone who thinks I don't understand," she replied. On the other end of the line, the bank manager straightened in his chair. "Then," he said carefully, "we should talk in person." She smiled. For the first time that day, it wasn't polite. "I agree," she said, "soon." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. Behind her, the men laughed again. Ahead of her, the truth was already moving. They just didn't know it yet. And the worst part for them? The bank always kept records. The bank branch looked different when she returned. Not warmer, not kinder, more alert. The security guard at the entrance straightened when he saw her approach, eyes flicking briefly to the name on the visitor list clipped to his podium. He didn't smile, but he nodded, respectful, careful. She noticed. Everything in places like this was about subtle signals. Who was expected? Who mattered? Who didn't? The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. Mirrors on 3 sides reflected her posture. Composed, deliberate, unhurried. The same black dress she had worn to the funeral days earlier, now paired with a simple silver brooch at the collar. Nothing extravagant, nothing accidental. When the doors opened, a woman was already waiting. "Mrs. Hale?" she asked, voice professional. "Yes." "I'm Claire. Mr. Daniel is expecting you." "No." "I'm sorry for your loss." No empty sympathy, just business. They walked past glass-walled offices, where men and women paused mid-conversation, eyes following her without making it obvious. She could feel the shift. Not recognition, but curiosity. The kind that preceded recalculation. Daniel stood when she entered his office. He was younger than she remembered, or maybe she was simply seeing him more clearly now. Crisp suit, sleeves precisely tailored, no unnecessary warmth in his expression. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "Thank you for seeing me," she replied. They sat across from each other at a wide desk, polished to a mirror shine. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't waste time. Instead, he slid a folder toward her. Inside were documents she had never seen before. Not summaries, not explanations. Records. "This is the authorization trail tied to the reference number you gave me," Daniel said. "Every access, every touch, every attempt." She turned the pages slowly. Names, dates, digital signatures, system logs. She stopped at one page. Her finger traced a line of text. "This approval code," she said quietly. "It's fabricated." Daniel nodded. "Yes." "And the accounts?" she asked. "Locked," he said. "As of this morning." She looked up. "All of them." "Every account associated with the consolidation attempt," he confirmed, "pending investigation." For the first time, something close to relief passed through her chest. Not emotion, not satisfaction, just the removal of a weight that had been pressing for days. "They told me everything was already finalized," she said. Daniel leaned back slightly. "They counted on you not knowing how to verify that." She met his eyes. "They were wrong." "Yes," he said. "They were." There was a pause. Then Daniel added carefully, "This isn't standard." She didn't respond. He continued. "The attempt to restructure assets without proper authorization, especially under the guise of familial consent, raises serious compliance concerns." "What kind?" she asked. "Criminal," he said plainly. The word hung between them. Criminal. It didn't shock her. It confirmed what she had already felt, that this wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. Daniel slid another document forward. "This is the internal audit request," he said. "Once it's filed, there's no quiet way out." She read the heading, Internal Audit, Priority Review. "And if I sign this?" she asked. "The bank initiates a full investigation," he replied. "All transactions freeze. All parties involved are formally notified. Not accused, not yet, but exposed." She closed the folder. "I want them notified," she said. Daniel studied her for a moment. "You understand this will escalate quickly?" "Yes." "And publicly," he added. "There will be records, questions." She nodded. "I've lived quietly long enough." He pushed the document toward her. She signed. As soon as the pen lifted from the page, Daniel picked up the phone on his desk. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "Proceed." That was it. No drama. No raised voices. Just the sound of systems turning. Across town, the men were still celebrating. The message reached them during lunch. At first, it didn't make sense. One of them checked his phone, frowned, and checked again. "Is anyone else locked out of the account?" he asked. Another pulled out his tablet. "It's probably a system update." But then the notifications kept coming. Access restricted. Authorization revoked. Pending review. Their confidence wavered. They called the bank. They were placed on hold. They laughed it off. Then the call dropped. By the time they regrouped in the same meeting room where they had mocked her days earlier, the atmosphere had changed. No jokes, no smiles, just confusion edging toward fear. "What do you mean, audit?" one of them demanded into his phone. Another slammed his hand on the table. "This has to be a mistake." A third paced near the window. She couldn't have done this. But she had. And worse, she hadn't done it loudly. She had done it correctly. Back at the bank, Daniel reviewed the preliminary findings with her. "The authorization code traces back to an external consultant," he said, "hired through a shell firm." "Which one?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. The name meant nothing to her, but the pattern did. "This consultant doesn't exist," Daniel continued. "At least, not legally. The firm is a front." She exhaled slowly. "They planned this," she said. "Yes. For how long?" He hesitated. "Months. Months. Before the funeral, before the flowers, before the condolences." She closed her eyes, not from grief, from clarity. "They were waiting," she said, "for me to be vulnerable." Daniel didn't disagree. "There's more," he added. He brought up another file. "This authorization format," he said, pointing to the signature block. "It's outdated." Her eyes sharpened. "How outdated?" "Retired 6 years ago," he replied. "Replaced after a compliance overhaul." She looked at him. "Then how did they know to use it?" Daniel leaned back. "That's the question." A memory surfaced, distant, almost buried. A meeting, years ago. Her husband, a conference room. A man from the bank explaining new compliance standards. Her husband had listened, very carefully. "They used old information," she said. "Information only someone close would have." Daniel's gaze hardened. "That narrows the field significantly." She folded her hands together. "And the council?" she asked. "The advisory board." He hesitated again. "They endorsed the consolidation," he admitted, "without verifying the authorization." She raised her eyebrows. "They didn't check. They assumed," he said, "based on reputation." Reputation. Another shield. Daniel closed the file. "The bank will need to address this formally," he said. "There will be statements, corrections." "And the people involved?" she asked. "They'll be questioned," he replied. "Under oath, if necessary." She stood. "I want to be present," she said. "At the hearings?" he asked. "Yes." Daniel considered this. "There's something you should know," he said finally. "Once this goes forward, the narrative will change." She looked at him. "They won't see you as a widow," he continued. "They'll see you as a variable." A small smile touched her lips. "Let them," she said. As she left the bank, her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. "We need to talk." She didn't reply. Another message followed seconds later. "This is getting out of hand." She stopped walking. Typed one line, so was the lie. Then she turned the phone off. Inside the bank, Daniel watched her go through the glass wall. He exhaled slowly, because now he understood something the others hadn't yet realized. They weren't facing a grieving widow. They were facing someone who knew how systems failed and how they broke. Soon the council would convene. Soon the documents would surface, and when they did, the room wouldn't laugh. It would fall silent. The council chamber had never been this full. Rows of seats were occupied not just by council members and advisors, but by auditors, legal observers, and 2 journalists who had been granted access under the bank's transparency clause. The air was formal, restrained, tense, the kind of tension that came not from anger, but from uncertainty. At the long table at the front of the room, the men sat rigidly, the same men who had laughed, the same men who had spoken about her as if she were an inconvenience, a relic, a signature to be harvested and dismissed. They had expected a procedural meeting. They had not expected her. When she entered, escorted quietly by Claire from the bank, the murmurs rippled through the chamber. Heads turned, a few brows lifted in mild irritation. One of the council members leaned toward another and whispered, "Why is she here?" Another frowned. "This is inappropriate." She took her seat at the far end of the table without acknowledging them. She didn't smile. She didn't lower her gaze. She placed her folder neatly in front of her and folded her hands. The chair of the council cleared his throat. "This session is called to address the recent asset freeze and audit initiated by the bank," he began. "We are here to clarify—" "To correct," a voice interrupted calmly. It wasn't loud, but it carried. The chair paused, visibly displeased. "Excuse me?" Daniel stood from his seat along the wall. "With respect," he said, "this session isn't about clarification, it's about correction." A few council members exchanged looks. "And you are?" the chair asked coolly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward, placed a document on the table and spoke with quiet authority. "Daniel Wright," he said, "Regional Compliance Director, 17 years with the institution." The room shifted. One of the men swallowed. Daniel continued. "This audit was triggered following the discovery of a fraudulent authorization attempt involving estate assets under your advisory oversight." "That's a serious allegation," one of the men snapped. "We were assured everything was in order." "You were assured," Daniel replied evenly. "You did not verify." The chair stiffened. "Are you accusing this council of negligence?" "I am stating it as a documented fact," Daniel said. He nodded once. Claire distributed folders around the table. As they opened them, the color drained from several faces. Logs, signatures, timelines. One man flipped pages too quickly, as if speed could undo what was printed. Another stared at a single line, unmoving. "This is impossible," someone muttered. Daniel turned slightly, gesturing toward her. "This audit began at the request of Mrs. Eleanor Hale." The room went still. Every eye turned toward her. She lifted her gaze slowly. The chair scoffed. "Mrs. Hale is not a party to this council." "No," Daniel said. "She is the principal stakeholder." Laughter broke out, sharp, disbelieving. "A stakeholder," one man said. "She's a widow. She doesn't even understand—" Daniel raised a hand. "Before you finish that sentence," he said quietly, "you may want to review page 12. Silence followed. They did. The laughter died, because there, in unmistakable print, was a name, her name, but not where they expected it, not as beneficiary, not as consenting party, as controlling trustee. The chair blinked. "That can't be right." Daniel didn't move. "It is." One of the men leaned forward, voice shaking. "Her husband was the trustee." "He was," Daniel agreed, "until his death." "And then?" "And then," Daniel interrupted, "the authority transferred." "To whom?" someone demanded. Daniel turned to her. She stood, slowly. The room felt smaller as she spoke. "My husband amended the trust 6 years ago," she said, "after a compliance briefing that explained the risks of concentrated advisory power." A few heads snapped toward Daniel. "He named a successor trustee," she continued, "one who would not be influenced by family pressure, one who understood the system from the inside." She opened her folder. "And he did not announce it." The chair's voice cracked. "Who is the successor trustee?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize it. She simply stated it. "I am." The word landed like a verdict. "So no," one of them said. "That's—" Daniel slid another document forward. "Filed, notarized, verified," he said. "Effective immediately upon Mr. Hale's passing." The room erupted. "You knew?" one man shouted at another. "You said this was settled. You told us she signed." Daniel raised his voice for the first time. "She never signed," he said. "You forged it." Silence slammed down. Daniel continued, now relentless. "The authorization code used was obsolete. The consultant hired was fictitious. The access points trace back to your advisory network." He paused. "And every action was logged." One man stood abruptly. "This is a witch hunt." Daniel met his eyes. "This is an audit." She spoke again, softly. "You told me I was nobody now," she said, "that I didn't own anything, that I should sign and go home." Her gaze moved across them one by one. "I listened," she said, "and while you were laughing, I was remembering." The chair slumped back in his seat. Daniel turned to the journalists. "The bank is formally referring this matter to federal regulators," he announced. "Effective today." Gasps. One man whispered, "You can't do this." Daniel's voice was cold. "We already have." Security appeared at the doors. The council session adjourned without ceremony. No closing remarks, no dignity, only consequences. 6 months later, the headlines were quiet but devastating. 3 council members resigned. 2 were indicted. The advisory board was dissolved and restructured under new compliance rules. The bank issued a public apology. She declined to comment. Instead, she funded a legal education program for widows navigating estate disputes. She didn't attend galas. She didn't give interviews. But when a young woman once asked her how she survived being underestimated for so long, she answered simply, by listening until the truth had no place left to hide. And somewhere in the system, her name remained. Not loud, not celebrated, but absolute. Because they hadn't been facing a poor widow. They had been facing the one person who could stop them, and did. If this story moved you, subscribe, like, and share it with someone who believes silence is weakness. It isn't. Sometimes it's strategy.